The Mummy 3 is regarded as the worst one of the trilogy by most people. Whether if that's because Steven Sommers didn't direct it is beyond my knowledge, but what I find even more odd is that whenever the Mummy trilogy comes up in conversation, people will gush about how great the first one is and how awful the third one is. But nobody really talks about The Mummy 2, which I think is the worst one. But in order to really get an understanding of The Mummy 3 and why I appreciate it more than most people, we should probably recap the events leading up to it. So the first one is a big hit, of course. Everyone loves it. Classic of the adventure genre, etc., etc. It was lightning in a bottle, so of course a second movie was pretty much a guarantee.
By the time we finished making Mummy 1, I had all these ideas, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to make a sequel? Because I think I could even, do better.
But what can you do with The Mummy? Unlike Indiana Jones, you can't really branch off from a title like The Mummy. Lucas and Spielberg were very wise on this front. The first film was called Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's only until after the fact did they call it Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so on, because these two realized that naming the series Indiana Jones would be easier to sell because of brand recognition. It's easier to sell the familiar than something with a different title. But when we look at The Mummy, those involved in the production must have realized almost immediately that they were boxed in from the very beginning. You see, The Mummy is one of the oldest and most popular film characters ever to be on the big screen. So if you drop The Mummy from the title and opt into naming your sequel Rick O'Connell and the whatever, you lose out on a recognizable brand that's as old as the industry itself. So from a completely business perspective, it makes sense to keep the title and then just think of a cool subtitle to go under that. So you're basically screwed from the start because you're now forced into making a sequel called The Mummy, which limits the kind of adventure stories you can tell because it now has to be about a mummy.
The mummy has been resurrected. He's very angry.
So it's pretty much unavoidable to be repetitive with this franchise. And in the industry, when it comes to a sequel, there's usually two trains of competing thoughts about what to do with a sequel. The first is simple. Do the first one again, with some slight differences, which was pretty common around this time. The other option is go in a completely different direction, like your Empire Strikes Back, Wrath of Khan, Temple of Doom, Gremlins 2, Psycho 2, The Exorcist 3, and I would even argue The Road Warrior, which leaned more into action and away from the dramatic elements of the first one. So with The Mummy 2, there feels like two forces pulling in different directions. I think Steven Sommers wanted to go in a different direction, especially with the characters, but keep the plot relatively the same as the last film.
It needed to be a new adventure, a new story, new special effects. I didn't want to rely on old tricks. I had to, take it to a whole new level, make it, not only bigger, but try to make it much better.
Honestly, I'd be okay with having the same plot. Like, these movies aren't that complicated. So I think it's okay to do somewhat of the same thing with a sequel. Because what made the first one so wonderful was its simplicity, but also cheekiness towards the adventure genre.
What's the challenge then?
Rescue the damsel in distress, kill the bad guy, and save the world.
Oh, Winston Havelock, at your service, sir.
At times, it even felt like a parody of the genre. A group of white people with no three-dimensional aspects go wandering into the desert with shovels to find a mummy and bring it back to life by accident. Our hero is a gun nut whose solution to every problem is to savagely scream and shoot things. Like, these aren't complicated people or movies, but that's what made them fun. It was the purest form of entertainment for its time, and it's really hard to capture that in a sequel. That's why I don't really watch movies from a fan perspective anymore, because trying to compare a new Star Wars or Terminator movie to the series' best is an instant recipe for being disappointed. I like to judge movies now on their own merits, and if it connects to other movies, you can adjust your thoughts based on previous works, but solely comparing the latest Star Wars movie, for example, to The Empire Strikes Back is a perfect recipe for being let down. Here's the other thing about sequels. They're rarely better than the first film. Why though? Well, I like to look at Ghostbusters 2 and The Empire Strikes Back. Both of those films had an original and novel concept that nobody had seen before. So when the first movie came out, they were big hits not just because they were good movies, but because nobody had seen anything like it before. So when it comes to a sequel, the novelty of the first film's concept has worn off. That's what's so hard about making a sequel to such an original film. It's harder to surprise the audience now that they know what's coming. I had this issue with Deadpool 2. It's a good movie, but it's just another Deadpool movie. Deadpool was great when it came out because it was so refreshing in the crowded landscape of superhero films with their own universes and timelines. So it was nice to have somebody come and sort of comment on superhero movies.
No, I'm not going to give you anything. Don't up your ass. You pull the trigger. If you do not shut
We've had it plenty of times in the past, like Mel Brooks doing so with Blazing Saddles in the Western genre, Spaceballs spoofing Star Wars, and the Zucker brothers with cop movies of the 70s going into the 80s. So again, it's almost twice as hard to make a movie that lives up to the original because the audience has seen the trick up your sleeve already. So it's a miracle to have lightning strike twice, or even 3 times in a series. That's why lots of filmmakers try to do something different with sequels. Not only because it interests them more for being uncharted territory, but it'll be something new to the palette for audiences as well. However, that means more of a financial risk for whoever is funding the movie. That's why so many sequels have a samey feel to them, or they're underwhelming.
What?
Financiers want to make safer financial decisions, especially in the competitive streaming market of today. So with The Mummy 2, there is that temptation to make another Mummy movie, similar to Indiana Jones, but just change things around a bit. But I think the biggest mistake with The Mummy 2 is that nobody really committed to either doing the same movie again or going in a different direction. Instead, they did both while simultaneously doing neither. The worst part about the movie is what was done with the main characters, where Rick and Evelyn are now these godlike descendants of ancient warriors. I suppose that Stephen Sommers was trying to make them more depthful characters, but it ruins everything that made the first film great. They were never meant to be depthful characters. They were purposely archetypes for a reason. Rick was Errol Flynn and Evelyn was the plucky, intelligent female. Then they got together at the end of the film. It was a simple idea and the characters were meant to be audience surrogates.
Stimulated its audience, I guess young boys in particular, to sort of want to live vicariously through those characters that they saw.
Men saw themselves as the dashing Rick O'Connell, and females perhaps saw themselves as beautiful and whip-smart Evelyn, who finds a soulmate at the end of a thrilling adventure where the fate of the world itself is in their hands. It's the quintessential fantasy for audiences, which is why that first film was such a big hit. But making these two characters descendants of gods ruins that relatability, and now audiences don't have those grounded characters to latch onto. They now felt above us and beyond our grasp. I think The Mummy 2 is okay, but the Descendants of God subplot in bringing back Imhotep, literally so they can tag team the Scorpion King at the end, is the worst aspect of that film. But hey, at least we got this gem of a moment. So enough cynicism, let's get back to The Mummy 3. After the second one, I think there was this idea of, let's return to the basics.
For me, directing is about entertaining. The Mummy movies are a romantic, fun romp with some mind-blowing special effects. You know, I love that. It's a great combo.
So they're just focused now on making something fun and not trying to pretend it's anything more than that. And Stephen Sommers didn't return to write and direct, I'm sure because he didn't know what to do with another one of these, and he was tired from making The Mummy Returns, and Van Helsing back to back to back, so he opted to produce the film instead.
People always go, oh, but you didn't direct it. I'm like, oh, look, I love it. I love the franchise, and I love the characters, and I just hope that it keeps getting better and better.
I actually really liked the choice of writers for this film. The duo wrote Lethal Weapon 4 a few years previous, and Shanghai Noon. Shanghai Noon especially is a delightful film. It has all those same elements you need for a mummy movie. Action, adventure, and comedy.
Take your hand off.
Not only that, but taking the Mummy franchise to China I think was a really smart move, which ties into my previous conversation over sequels and how they can feel repetitive. Though The Mummy 3 is just another Mummy movie, at least the setting is different, and it feels like something new that we haven't seen before. So I admire that chance they took. I just don't understand the criticism of those who say, well, how stupid were they to make a Mummy movie and not set it in Egypt? Well, I mean, other cultures practice mummifying their dead as well, such as the Incas and Chinese. There was supposed to be a fourth Mummy movie set in South America dealing with the Incas, actually, which I would have liked to have seen, but was canceled due to the failure of this third one. Setting the movie in China also feels like the writer's idea.
We had always set the movie in China.
Movies like Kill Bill, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Kung Fu Panda were big at the time. So again, setting the movie in China was not only a good financial move, but a good marketing one as well that also changes up the setting a bit. So it's a good compromise between familiar and new. And I think their script for The Mummy 3 is fine. The choice to bring on Rob Cohen to direct wasn't the worst idea ever, all allegations aside. Cohen actually made one of my favorite childhood films, Dragonheart. Also quite the uneven film, but it's still enjoyable. He also kicked off the Fast and Furious series, which ended up being very profitable, so again, from a financial perspective, he's a safe choice. But Rob Cohen is like your Joel Schumachers and your Brett Ratners, all allegations aside. No offense to them, but they're filmmakers you hire to direct the script that was written. They deliver a film that's on par with the quality of the script and aren't really ones to add any artistic flair to elevate the material. So blaming an entire movie on them is silly to me because they're just there to do the job, which I suppose is something to be upset about. But most of the time it is studio higher-ups that are the foundational issues for most iffy or bad movies. But again, I get it. Hollywood is more of a business now, and studio executives not only need to make interesting content, but make sure it's a financially smart move as well so that they're able to continue making interesting content. It's a very stressful job, and you have to balance a lot of different things, so sometimes a bad movie or bad decision squeaks out. It happens. When it comes to each one of these mummy movies, there's one constant throughout all of these films, though. The prologue. And in every one of these films, it's the worst part.
5,000 years ago, a fierce warrior known as the Scorpion King led a great army on a campaign for the known world.
However, it is the worst in The Mummy 3, coming in at a whopping 10 minutes. That's something I won't defend. Honestly, if it were me, I would have skipped the opening prologue and opted for filling out all of this information as the narrative progresses. Because here's the thing, what gets an audience hooked on a movie is usually a question or some kind of curiosity. The best filmmakers are always careful about what information to reveal to the audience and when. This keeps us hooked because we don't know where something is going and we're eager to see the results. With The Mummy 3, everything is laid out in the first 10 minutes, and it really would have been better if we learned this information through the characters' interactions, or perhaps through big reveals in the story. So if it were me, I would have done the super time lapse from the Emperor's statue to present day where Alex's dig site is. Establish what's going on there and maybe foreshadow Roger's betrayal. But don't reveal that this is Rick and Evelyn's son right away. Let that reveal come out as we get introduced to Rick and Evie, and what they're up to in the present day after all these years. Allow the audience to ponder a bit. Who is this new character? So then cut to Rick and introduce him the way it is in the movie. Maybe even have a fun match cut where we go from a close-up of Alex to one of Rick. This connects the two characters in the audience's head. So we wonder, well, they both look similar. Are they father and son? Is this a flashback of Rick when he was younger? Like an Indiana Jones 3 moment? Let the audience's imagination play a bit. That keeps them interested. But honestly, this is a cute introduction to Rick. Everything I like about this movie is really stuffed into the first act. The second the Emperor comes back to life, the movie gradually gets worse. But Rick's introduction's wonderful.
You can run, but you can't hide.
This makes us believe he's on some kind of adventure. But when it's revealed that he's fishing, we now understand Rick's status quo. He's retired and bored, and he's not good at it. We get the idea that Rick is someone who doesn't know any other life outside of adventuring.
You can almost feel himself say the words, "It's time to hang up my guns." This is the last one.
Evelyn also has a cute introduction as well, but one of the major criticisms of this film is the recasting of Evie, this time played by Maria Bello. It's uncertain why Weiss didn't return, whether it was script problems, Steven Sommers not directing, her recently having a kid, or not feeling comfortable playing a woman with a 21-year-old son. It's the least of the film's issues, so I think recasting the part was the right move. It's been done before, like in The Dark Knight or with Rhodey in Iron Man. But acting as though it's some great sin to recast Evie in a third Mummy movie is kind of ridiculous. And there's a self-awareness to this film that I don't think people give enough credit to.
Until they asked me when will there be another Mummy adventure.
It's literally referencing the fans who, for years, asked this very question.
But do you really want it? Of course we do.
It's one that's still asked to this day, even. This sort of reminds me of what Lana Wachowski did with The Matrix Resurrections, where the film itself is making light of the fact that people want another one of the same movie, commenting on sequels in general, which I touched on earlier.
After our first contact went so badly, we thought elements from your past might help ease you into the present.
Nothing comforts anxiety like little nostalgia.
But what I like most about Rick and Evie's relationship in this movie is that they're not the perfect couple we always thought they were. And the fact that they're kind of bored with each other actually makes lots of sense. Evelyn and Rick fell in love while on an adventure, and now the thrill of all that is in the rearview mirror. They're now forced to really get to know each other, and when they do so, they come off as empty and comically void.
So how did your book reading go?
I think that's a great touch, which is funny because that's how they were originally written in the first movie. Again, they were never characters. They were audience surrogates. So if you are going to make Rick and Evelyn actual characters, this movie gets it right. Throw a problem at these two that's relatable to most people and not make them gods. The fact that they have issues with their son also makes a lot of sense, because I don't think their relationship was ever based on any kind of love, but more the thrill of adventure and doing that together. The second Red movie actually touches on this a bit.
You are driving me nuts, Marlon. Listen, if it makes you feel better, bring the girl. I'm not gonna bring the girl anywhere, all right?
Don't bring the girl where?
So having Alex growing up in that environment must have led to some disconnect between him and his parents. See, this is kind of interesting stuff. I just wish the movie didn't abandon all of this the second the Emperor came back to life.
Here we go again.
What I also find funny is that this really is a father-son movie, and it came out the same year as Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, also a movie about a father and son. It must have been coincidental because they came out like 3 months apart. By the way, I like this edit. The father-son angle is a good idea, but trying to spin off this series from what it was into the Alex O'Connell series, I don't think was a good idea. Brendan Fraser was really the draw of these movies, and it's like at the end of the Crystal Skull when it was hinted at that Mutt would be the new Indy. Nobody wants a new Indy or a new Rick. The fact that this series ended with 3 movies, I think was smart, even though they were planning another trilogy with Alex. There is a tease for this idea when Alex first uncovers the Emperor's tomb, which I want to talk about. It's a fine sequence, and I think it's really well constructed, but something I hate is when a movie is thrown in the trash simply on the basis of plot holes. If a movie is so incompetent that it doesn't make sense, I get the criticism. But slighting a movie just because of minute logic is petty. And believe me, there's a lot of, quote, plot holes in this movie. But because of its sort of lighter tone and its sort of self-awareness, I'm more lenient towards it. Even in the Crystal Skull, when he's in the fridge and he survives the atomic bomb, I'm more okay with that because it's an Indiana Jones movie. It's not like Bridge of Spies, you know? But Alex was a 10-year-old British boy in the last film. Now he's a brunette with an American accent. How could they mess that up? Wouldn't these diggers have announced they found the door earlier? Why don't these guys just run off to the side so that these aeroplanes won't hit them? In the prologue, the Emperor wasn't on the chariot or in the statue. Who put him there? Why is the Emperor below his men when he's above them in the prologue? Who put this compass and these elaborate traps and the pulley systems here? Honestly, yes, those are big problems in other movies, but again, this is a mummy movie. That isn't a slight towards this franchise, though. And the series has always been corny and embraced its cheesier genre elements.
Because, you know, one of the things that's so lovely about the Mummy films is that there's a great interaction between, you know, comedy and horror and action.
So I'm okay with something silly and dumb like this movie. Obviously, I'm embracing those elements and calling them charm, but whatever. I like it. Oh yeah, melting acid face guy is cool. Everybody hates on Luke Ford for his performance in this movie. I think he's fine given the material in the script. There isn't that much to work with acting-wise, so it has to take someone really charming and charismatic to elevate the lack of material like Brendan Fraser did in the first one, or I would even argue Daisy Ridley in The Force Awakens. Actors like Harrison Ford and Brendan Fraser are like 1 in every 10 million. So honestly, they could have done worse with casting Alex. And I really like Alex and Rick's dynamic in this movie though. It's simple and blunt, but it's something. One of my favorite parts of the whole film is when Rick and Alex compare each other's gun chests. It's cute because Rick was always a gun nut and Alex being the same, but just with more modern tech is a fun touch to further their butting head relationship. And it's really those touches that make movies fun. It actually might be my favorite bit in the whole movie. So Rick and Evie are asked by some guy to take this thing to Shanghai, and they go to a nightclub. Whatever gets them, Alex and Jonathan in the same place, whatever. That's also the problem with this series. Jonathan. Here's the thing. I actually like Jonathan. Especially in the first one, because he does feel like a satire of the comic relief sidekick.
What I kind of enjoy about this character is that there is no development.
But as the series progressed, it's almost like a running gag that he has to be in these movies.
Jonathan, get them back!
Like, he does nothing on the second and third film, but he's still there. Like, whatever. In fact, that Jonathan owns a nightclub called Emontet's. It's pretty funny, though, because he was always a cynical character in it for the money. The fact that he capitalized on Emotet and started up a nightclub. It's fun. By the way, Brendan Fraser really rocks the hell out of a fedora. Soon after this, Rick and Evie share a short scene outside where they discuss their relationship and how they've lost Alex. I agree the scene would have been more impactful with Rachel Weisz, but oh well. I just like seeing Rick and Evie deal with a problem that isn't really solvable with brute force. They have issues connecting with their son, and it's touching, but also interesting to see our two heroes deal with a problem we haven't seen them encounter before.
We spent our entire lives searching for priceless artifacts, and the one thing that's most precious to us we've lost.
Oddly enough, when I look back on this movie, the first word that comes to mind is, ironically, restraint. This was around the time Transformers really took off and the idea of we can do anything with CGI was becoming a thing. So there is that temptation to go insane with set pieces in this movie, and they really didn't. What I like is how there's really 3 big set pieces in the movie, and they're all really distinct and memorable. Sometimes not for the right reasons. But they're memorable. The first one, and the best one, is the Shanghai chase. Similar to the Crystal Skull, the best set piece is the smaller one that feels real and not too bloated. The second one in the Himalayan mountains, and the third one is in the desert. They're all distinct. Also, there's a structure to those set pieces too. The first and second set pieces result in failure, but it's because of the family's inability to work out their indifferences and work together. Throughout the Shanghai chase, the family is constantly bickering instead of focusing on the Emperor. It's not until they solve their differences after the Yetis save them does the family resolve their issues. Again, it's not the most complicated stuff ever, but it's something. So now we come to the Emperor, which is something a lot of people take issue with, and I do it to an extent. Jet Li isn't really in this film that much, and he's usually a CGI statue who tears his face off and throws it at people. But Jet Li was a really busy guy at this time, so the fact that they got him at all for this film is a miracle, and the writers found clever ways to write around that. The one thing I can't defend, though, is how the action is shot. It's definitely a shame Jet Li didn't get to show off more of his martial arts, but even the action we got is poorly shot with that Paul Greengrass style shaky cam.
It's like you got to make this like war footage, right? It's too perfectly framed. Shake things up.
It's disappointing to say the least. Then we come to the ending. Like I said, the film kind of slowly goes downhill, and of course there is a giant Lord of the Rings style 2 armies fighting each other ending. But it's also something we haven't really seen in the Mummy series before. I guess kind of in the Mummy 2. But these Mummy movies were usually more focused on smaller endings or confined to one space, so I'm fine with a giant battle for a few reasons. One is because the film's set pieces have progressively gotten bigger as the film progressed. We had a chase through Shanghai, a battle on the Himalayan mountains, so the ending in the desert with airplanes and jeeps with machine guns and dead skeleton things, that's fine. The second reason is everyone kind of has something to do. Kind of. In fact, Jonathan has more to do this time than Rick or Evie, who are just basic ground troops shooting the undead, which, by the way, can I just mention that I'm glad Rick isn't wearing his usual white shirt and brown pants with the tall boots here. I love that he doesn't have the Indiana Jones problem where they wear the same clothes for 40 years. I don't know. Something different. I appreciate that.
It's my favorite blue shirt.
Anyways, Mother is fighting the Emperor, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon style, to get the dagger back, driving around on a bike, also shooting things. Even the pilot comes back and flies a plane around so Jonathan can also shoot things. He also drops a bomb on Yin and Yang's car. But why didn't that giant bomb, blow them up? Like, they're still alive. They come back and they have like a little ash makeup on their face and they're fine. But again, I understand. At this point, the movie is fully embracing its cornier tone, and I'm fine with that. And also, Yin and Yang's death is a lot cooler than them just blowing up. Even though it's ripping off the Temple of Doom, which is much cooler. And the final reason why I'm fine with the end battle is that the 2 undead skeleton armies fighting each other is a fun reference to Jason and the Argonauts. Steven Sommers originally pitched The Mummy as Indiana Jones meets Jason and the Argonauts. It just feels more memorable when they're two undead armies instead of just random humans clashing against each other. And they're already dead, so the two dead armies just slashing at each other is comical to me. What's even more comical is hearing the generic pottery breaking sound effect 1,000 times, like literally 1,000 times. It goes beyond being funny, but again, don't take this movie seriously. Like the fact that the Chinese government is completely unaware of the fact that a giant battle is happening in the desert somewhere is also pretty comical, and then killing the Emperor Suspiria style is pretty neat too. Looking back on this movie, I get this feeling that if it came out today, it would be better received than it was in 2008, which was the same year Marvel came out with Iron Man and kicked off the MCU. Christopher Nolan had just come out with The Dark Knight. Ever since then, movies have gotten bigger and more out of control to where a big, giant CGI ending is no longer satisfying to general audiences. Hollywood's been trying to recapture that adventurous tone of old recently, and I think Mummy 3 is a fine movie to look back on for its simplicity and cheekier tone. Especially today, where I feel like movies are becoming darker tonally and kind of less fun. The Mummy 3 is not a great movie by any means. It's fine, but I don't see it to be as bad as everyone else finds it to be. So hopefully I convinced you to rewatch the film with a new perspective.